delegation also includes Mr. Paul Kufuor, Mr. Paul Kufuor, who is the Anglophone Project Coordinator for WADEMOS, Ms. Marie Joseine Iga, the Francophone Project Coordinator for WADEMOS, and then Mr. David Asante Dako, a research analyst at WADEMOS, and Mr. Jonah Eledi, who is a communications specialist for WADEMOS. Since we've been here, we have met with the ECOWAS, the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, the Human Rights Commission, the National Peace Committee, the Interparty Advisory Council, Arise TV, the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, and also we've had interactions with a segment of media and CSO representatives. The mission was briefed by stakeholders on the political and electoral landscape and shared among concerns requiring attention to ensure a credible and peaceful election. Members of the press, our major observations that we have made during our visit. First of all, the mission recognizes the importance of this election, considering the strides that Nigeria has made in sustaining democracy over the last 24 years without any unconstitutional interruption. And this, I think, is one that we must all celebrate and acknowledge. To this extent, we commend the people of Nigeria in their quest to deepen democratic elections in the sub-region as reflected in the extensive reforms, including the passage and assent of the Electoral Act 2022 and the subsequent legal deployment of the bimodal voter accreditation system, BVAS, and the INEC results viewing portal, the IRF. These are two critical interventions that signal an improvement in the voting and results transmission and collation systems for the 2023 election, with implication for promoting transparency and trust in the electoral process. We further acknowledge efforts by INEC to improve access to the polling stations by increasing the number of polling stations by 56,872, bringing the total number of polling stations or polling units to 176,846. This is further supported by reforms aimed at improving the independence of INEC through the establishment of the Independent National Election Commission Fund to finance elections in the country. We did receive strong assurance from INEC on its preparations for the conduct of, or its preparedness for the conduct of the election. We also acknowledge a significant increase in public interest and enthusiasm in the election observed from the large number of new voters that were registered in the mop-up exercise. And this is encouraging, particularly the participation of young people. For the 2023 election, young people constitute an estimated 48 million of the total 92.3 million registered voters. This is a huge voting community whose actions throughout the polls will help determine the credibility and the peacefulness of the polls. The participation of civil society in supporting the electoral process at different stages is also quite notable. We note particularly the role played by civil society in voter education, awareness creation, research and analysis, and peace promotion activities. We do also note the low participation of women as candidates in contesting for positions in the elections. Now, notwithstanding these observations and progress made in preparation for the election, the mission notes the following challenges that need to be addressed to ensure the credibility and integrity of the elections with about 29 days until election day. Major concerns were raised on the collection and issuance of PVCs. This includes concerns bordering on the INEC's failure to provide PVCs to registered voters who turn up at INEC offices, and on the other hand, the inability of registered voters to go and collect their PVCs from designated card collection centers. The PVCs have implications on voter turnout and legitimacy of the elections. The mission also notes the petitions filed at the federal court demanding INEC to recognize the use of temporary voter cards for the 2023 election, which could have some severe consequence on the election depending on the outcome of the ruling, and I hope on Monday, there will be some news on where this particular issue stands. 2, any large-scale malfunctioning of the BVAS on election day could cause anxiety among voters, and that INEC must endeavor to adhere to the contingency measures proposed to provide the necessary safeguards and assurance for citizens. CSOs were very optimistic about the deployment of the BVAS as a game changer for the 2023 elections. As such, all stakeholders must work collectively to ensure a successful deployment. Observations have also been made about multiple security concerns that could significantly threaten the smooth conduct of the elections. These include a strong undertone of religious and ethnic tensions taking center stage in the political discourse and debate among political parties and candidates alike. Also, the fact of sustained insecurity across the country as a result of increased incidents of kidnapping, banditry, insurgency, separatist groups creates a high level of uncertainty among the population. Another issue of concern is around the deployment of materials and logistics ahead of the election. This fear is exacerbated by the current long-running incidents of fuel scarcity in the country. We strongly note the postponement of previous elections in Nigeria partly due to these issues. As the election day draws nearer, some key issues in the media, including incidents of cyberbullying, hate speech, and misinformation, is also noted. The peace accord that was brokered by the National Peace Committee and endorsed by all political parties and presidential candidates have also been blatantly violated by political actors who choose to use insults, hate speech, and personality attacks on opponents instead of focusing on campaign issues. A growing number of stakeholders called on INEC to provide clarity on Section 134 of the Electoral Law that stipulates that the winner of the presidential race must attain a majority of votes and 25% of votes in at least 2/3 of states in Nigeria and the Federal Capital Territory. It is feared that INEC's failure to do so ahead of the election could result in disputes and possible violence in the event of a runoff. Ladies and gentlemen, some recommendations. For the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC should provide clarity on the electoral law which stipulates that the winner of the presidential race must attain the majority of total votes and 25% of votes in at least 2/3 of the states, and then the FCT. This is against the backdrop of multiple interpretations assigned to the law and expected competitiveness around the 2023 presidential race. Again, INEC must consider further expanding the deadline for the distribution of PVCs and also expedite the disbursement of cards to all registered voters to avoid disenfranchising voters due to the proposed no verification, no vote requirement for the election. In the same vein, registered voters who have not yet collected their PVCs should endeavor to go and collect them at designated collection points before the deadline elapses. There must be a conscious effort in ensuring that ad hoc staff are adequately trained to minimize potential human errors, particularly around the deployment of the BVAS on election day. To the security forces, there should be a commitment on the part of the security agencies and government towards ensuring that known hotspots of violence and conflicts are prioritized for adequate security coverage and interventions ahead of the elections and an election day. Also, the security agencies must be properly equipped and adequately resourced to provide security for the election. And we also wish that they respect and protect the rights of citizens, especially media, voters, election staff, and observers in general before and during and after the election. And we know that we've had incidents in the past. These important intermediaries that secure the rights of citizens have to be protected in order to ensure that we can have a credible election. our recommendation to government is that government must improve availability of fuel to mitigate the effect that the current shortages could have on the election. This has the tendency of increasing voter apathy and turnout, particularly for voters who travel long distances to their polling stations. Again, it has implications for the movement of security personnel and patrol teams, and basically every election stakeholder in a run-up to election and election day and afterwards. Government must resist the temptation to abuse incumbency in its administration of election and avoid election violence. Government should ensure increased participation of women in politics and governance through affirmative policies and programs. For political leaders and interest groups, political leaders and parties must go about their campaign with a very high degree of responsibility towards ensuring that the sanctity and integrity of the electoral process is guaranteed. Political parties and their candidates must eschew violence and avoid all forms of incitement as tools for mobilizing and canvassing for votes among their supporters. As a multi-ethnic and multi-religious society, Nigerian religious and traditional leaders must use their platforms to spread peaceful messages of nonviolence and good conduct required for peaceful and incident-free election. Again, we urge them to support local interventions aimed at resolving potential violence to reduce and calm tensions. CSOs should leverage on cooperation among themselves and with state institutions to champion participation and inclusion during the election, and they must also continue to use their platforms to campaign for free, transparent, and peaceful elections. The media must be on high alert to intercept and counter any instances of disinformation and misinformation, particularly on the day of election, and be apolitical and prone to the sensitivity surrounding this election in their reportage. And political parties should adhere to the peace accord and its commitment before, during, and after the election. The media should also popularize and demand accountability in the implementation of the peace accord. Lastly, to ECOWAS and the international community, that ECOWAS, the AU, and the international community should continue to monitor proceedings in the lead up to the elections and maintain their support for a free, credible, and fair elections in Nigeria. Thank you very much for your attention.
A solidarity visit to solidarize with stakeholders within the Nigerian electoral space to see how we can support, we can encourage, and also identify key issues within the electoral process that require closer attention by stakeholders. Without taking much time, I will invite the head of the delegation, the head of the mission, to come over and share with you some of the observations we've made. He is by name Dr. Kojo Asante, Director of Advocacy at Center for Democratic Development, Ghana, as well as one of the heads of WADEMOS.
They using the youths, to perpetrate evil. It's where our concern lie. Because I know for CDD has been doing so much in terms of enlightenment, training, and all of that. Remember in Producer, for instance, despite all the training, despite all the how are you engaging the candidates? If you want to meet with them, if you're saying you're meeting with IPAC, I'm sure I wouldn't know how many of the political candidates they are told this on our side. Stop using the youth for violence. And then my second question is, if they don't call them, how are you engaging them? Have you identified a problem?
Assisted voting, where they have to bring somebody they trust to be able to use and exercise their franchise. And I think the third one, for the deaf, yes. Yeah, I think it's a poster, yes. Yes. So I think the good thing is that some data collection was done through the registration. So it has allowed the INEC to be able to be targeted in their deployment of these materials to concentration of places where there's a concentrated number of persons with disability. One of the things they found, for example, is that albinism is one of the highest recorded disabilities. So that's one area that they'll be looking at. So it's on election day, it's not every place that you see these materials, but it's based on data that's been collected. And they are also trying to collect data during voting so that they can continue to have a much more accurate data of persons with disability. On the IPAC, I'll turn to my colleague Pokfor, who with the other team went to meet the IPAC. But on the issue of engaging candidates, we also met with the Peace Committee, who had met with the parties to sort of take stock of the violations that have happened. And they were very blunt that people were just not respecting the accord. But they are trying their very best to still work with the leaders and the candidates. But where they saw the biggest problem was spokespersons of candidates were the main culprits in sort of violating the accord. So they want to really work with them to try to, deal with that issues of hate speech and insults and so on. But Paul will talk about the meeting with IPAC after this. On Sadiq, the issue about suppression of votes. So in our conversation with the IPAC, it's not one of the issues that we discussed, but at least from the interaction, whether with civil society, media, and so on, there are dimensions to it. So we know there's an element of criminality because it's political corruption when people are using inducements to get people to basically surrender their rights to them. But there's also the individuals themselves, whether out of poverty or some other motivation, are surrendering their rights in order to take money and so on and so forth. On that, the latter side, it's education and engagement with young people. I've seen campaigns, whether from Yaga, any of our members, trying to encourage voters that they shouldn't give in to those kinds of entrapment. But it's the criminality side which requires investigation by security agencies, because this would undermine the election, where this is a deliberate attempt to suppress votes, and this it's a criminal action. So I think it's an area that we have to call on the security services, that it has to be investigated, because I don't think this is something that you see in the open. Somebody has to be deliberately investigated and get evidence that there is a scheme, going on. And maybe once you expose one and you can punish the person, then it will be a deterrent. But at the moment, you have these two dynamics playing out. So it's almost like it's a market. It's a demand and supply mechanism that's going on. You can deal with a bit of the demand side, but the supply side might be where the challenge is, right? So let me invite the individuals or the stakeholders who are going to make the election successful in terms of their own commitment to the agenda of securing credible elections. When, for example, we met with civil society, one of the things they talk about, which for me should be the posturing that we should take, is that, remember, we have done 24 years of uninterrupted democratic practice, and this is going to be the 7th consecutive election. In spite of the challenges at different times than when we have done it, incrementally, there are aspects that have improved as we go along. That signals that the more investment we make in securing the system, making it more free and fair, it's likely that we'll get to that position where we can have an election where a lot of these issues are minimized. So that pushing kind of helps you to see a cup half full than a cup half empty approach. The same with INEC. Talking to INEC, you can see that there's been, the Electoral Act is a serious step that has been taken by all stakeholders to try to deal with the issues of fraud. And I think if you talk to any stakeholder, they are looking at this as important. But of course, it has to be tested on election day. And what is going to happen on election day and how people react to it is important. So a lot of the education, even in our hotels, just seeing all the education that Yaga and CD West Africa are doing on just basic 101 on elections. What is the BVAS? What is the IREV? What is going to happen on election day? Because the citizens have to be prepared to be able to engage with these technologies that for the first time, some people in Ekiti and Oshun and Anambra and stuff have already experienced it. So it's not that it's novel in that sense. But we are talking about 176,000 polling units. So it's being scaled up. So what we do now, as we go along towards election year, is more education on the process so that people can manage their expectations. So my answer to your question is that it's not that I sit here and say everything will be fine on election day because we've had these discussions, but it's because of what people have already done up to this point and their commitment to continue to do more, even as we run to the elections. For me, is what gives me confidence that we're going to have a successful election. But we should, anytime you have to make a change, change can be fearful, particularly when it has to do with technology. Because even those of us who have some education and all of that, well, sometimes when they come and explain some of these things to you, you can't understand it, right? But I mean, in terms of biometric voter registration and verification systems, Nigeria is not the first place that it's been deployed. It was deployed in Ghana in 2012. And I can say that it has sanitized, our elections. So there are things that you used to have common, like ballot staffing. Ballot staffing, because you don't have this mechanism to check how many people have actually been verified to vote as against the number of ballots. People can, change numbers because you don't have that matching process to have it. BVAS will solve that problem. It might not solve your problem of underage voting, because that will happen at registration time, whether or not somebody is eligible to vote. If that is not sorted out during registration, it's not going to end up it will not solve your problem of who is a Nigerian and who is not. But it will solve your ballot staffing problem. It will solve, because there's a tallying system that now, and because it's a unique identifier, you cannot manipulate it. If you try to change it here, now you can compare. And the additional deployment of technology, the IREV, which puts the results sheet uploaded right onto a portal at the polling unit level, so that you don't have to worry about the processes that, the manual processes that you have to go. You are now having a backup to check that process as well. When in Kenya, it was a game changer. Within 3 hours, all the, I think it was almost 60% have been uploaded. And citizens can easily go and check their polling sheets to check whether or not what was declared is what is online. So by the time they went through the manual process, this has been online for a long time. So even if you have a dispute, because the evidence is all out there, when you go to court, you can say, check, because you can go to the portal and say, this particular polling sheet is different from the one I was giving or the one that was pasted. It should be easy to reconcile. So I think these safeguards, and as I said, it's been used in many, many, many places. And in Nigeria, it's been tested in the state level. So I think that we should all embrace it. On election day, you may have some breakdown, but that's why the contingencies, the response time, the monitoring teams, are there to make sure that if there is a problem, that it is addressed. And with election, you are always thinking about scale. So the fact that it is broken down in 1,000 places out of 176,000 does not mean your election is in crisis, right? So it's important that for media, because you are the intermediaries to the public when you are reporting these things, you understand the processes, you understand the systems, you understand the response times. We all, even as observers, when we go into elections, we are there to contribute to making the election successful. So when I promise you we'll be back to be with you for the election. So I'll read our statement from our observations the last 3 days, and then after that we'll take some questions from you. So this is the statement of WADEMOS Solidarity Mission to Nigeria ahead of the 25th February 2023 general elections issued during this mission's press briefing today, 27 January 2023 in Abuja. From January 24th to 28th, 2023, the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS, embarked on a pre-election solidarity mission to Nigeria ahead of the forthcoming presidential National Assembly election scheduled for February 25th, 2023, and then on the March 11th, 2023 gubernatorial and state elections. The mission was in recognition of the shared democratic values by people across the ECOWAS sub-region and in our acknowledgement of the unity among civil society and other civic actors across the West Africa sub-region, with our common desire to see democracy upheld in Nigeria. It formed part of WADEMOS's interventions aimed at promoting integrity and credibility of elections to be conducted in West Africa in 2023, beginning with the upcoming elections in Nigeria. This election is particularly important for the entire sub-region as it sets the tone for the subsequent elections in Sierra Leone and in Liberia. Sierra Leone is June 2023 and Liberia October 2023. The mission was informed by the following objectives: to solidarize with civil society, especially the WADEMOS members in Nigeria, around their planned activities for the 2023 Nigeria general elections. And our partners are here: YAGA Africa, CDD West Africa, Transition Monitoring Group, and the Women in Politics Forum. Then also to understand the general context within which the election is being held, to assess the level of preparedness of key electoral stakeholders as the elections approach, and to offer recommendations to key stakeholders to redress the challenges identified. Our delegation is made up of myself, the West Africa Election Observer Network officers, Madame Bernadette French, who is the Programs Director, National Elections Watch New in Sierra Leone. Madame is here. Madame Bernadette and myself are leaders of the delegation. Other members of the delegation include my brother Kopep Dubagat, who's our national coordinator for WADEMOS, Mr. Ibasa, who is the Director General of RADO in Senegal.
Encourage political parties to respect the peace accord that they all signed. That requires certain commitments from political parties to ensure that they respect the laws and regulations regarding the conduct of this particular election. They were also of the opinion that it's important to encourage faith-based leaders, other influential voices, intermediary voices, to use their platform to really campaign against activities that will warrant violence around the elections, but particularly activities that will involve mobilizing young people, massing young people to engage in violent activities and practices. So that's why in our statement, we made a very strong case that faith-based organizations, CSOs, media, and other intermediary voices should ensure that they use their platform to preach against the use of disinformation, misinformation, and all other activities that has the potential for triggering violence in the elections.